Signs that completely unmask a married man. Carl Jung. Have you ever been in the situation of feeling like something isn't right, but not being able to put your finger exactly on what it is? That nagging feeling that there's a missing piece of the puzzle, but everyone around you says you're being paranoid or overdone. Well, know that your intuition rarely makes mistakes. There is a deep psychological reason for this discomfort, and it has everything to do with signals that our unconscious picks up, but our conscious mind has not yet fully processed. When a married man lives a double life, he leaves invisible traces that most people have not been trained to identify. These are behavioral patterns so subtle that they go unnoticed in everyday life, but so consistent that once revealed, they become glaring. In this video, you will discover the 8 psychological signs that have completely unmasked this situation. These are not assumptions. They are real markers identified by depth psychology, ones that he simply cannot hide, no matter how hard he tries. Once you know these patterns, you'll never ignore your intuition again. The question is, are you prepared to finally understand what your unconscious already knew? 1. Obsessive cell phone control. There is a behavior that has become so common in recent years that many people don't even pay attention anymore, a person's relationship with their own phone. But when we look more carefully, we realize that there is a huge difference between wearing the device normally and having a compulsive need to keep it always close, always facing down, always protected from the eyes of others. This extreme protection does not come out of nowhere. It comes from an internal state of constant alertness, a vigilance that consumes psychic energy and leaves the person in permanent tension. Those who have nothing to hide simply do not develop this type of defensive behavior. The device is on the table, notifications appear, and there is no jolt when someone approaches. The difference is in the emotional reaction. When there is secrecy, the body responds even before the conscious mind processes the situation. The heart races, the hands automatically move to pick up the phone, the eyes widen for a split second. They are micro-expressions that betray the inner state, even when the person tries to maintain the outer composure. Another telling aspect is the unusual frequency of password changes. We are not talking about updating for digital security, but about a change that happens just when someone starts asking questions or shows distrust. It is an attempt to re-establish control over a territory that it feels threatened. The need to take the device even in the bathroom, in the kitchen, in any movement around the house also tells a story. This physical dependence reveals a deep fear that something will be discovered in their absence. The person does not trust to leave the device accessible even for 5 minutes, because he knows exactly what could be found there. What's more, phone conversations that once happened naturally in any environment now require extreme privacy. He leaves the room, lowers his voice, closes quickly when someone approaches. This pattern shows that there is content in conversations that cannot be shared or heard by others, creating a clear division between the public world and the secret world that inhabits that device. 2. The mysterious and unpredictable agenda. Anyone's life has a certain natural predictability. Work, fixed commitments, established schedules form a structure that allows the other to understand and follow the basic routine. But when this structure begins to dissolve without clear explanations, something has changed internally in the organization of this life. Professional commitments that come up at the last minute with suspicious frequency create a pattern that is hard to ignore. It is not the occasional meeting that extends, but a constant sequence of unforeseen events that always require physical and emotional absence. The person is present, but at the same time completely unavailable, creating a distance that did not exist before. What draws attention is not having a full agenda, but the lack of transparency about this agenda. Simple questions about where he has been or who he has met are answered with disproportionate irritation or with vague answers that say absolutely nothing. This defensiveness reveals that there is something being protected behind the apparent confusion of schedules. Business trips that increase in frequency also deserve close observation. Especially when these trips were not planned at the beginning of the year, they are not part of the historical pattern of the profession and are always accompanied by complex justifications that try to anticipate any questioning. It is as if the person was already preparing his defense even before being questioned. Weekends that were once sacred for rest and family life now have commitments that cannot be postponed. There's always something urgent that can't wait for Monday. There's always someone who needs that meeting right on Saturday afternoon. Personal life is being eroded by obligations that never end, are never completely resolved. And there is also the impossibility of making plans in advance. Any attempt to schedule something for 2 weeks from now is met with resistance, with the justification that the agenda is not yet closed, that it needs to confirm other things first. This permanent vagueness prevents the other person from building expectations or covering up for his presence at important moments, always keeping him with an available outlet. If you want to understand why a married man gets completely unmasked by these signs and how to protect your energy while keeping your value, follow the Jung Method. It reveals the hidden psychology behind his behavior. 3. The excess of unnecessary details. When a person naturally tells about their day, they share information in a simple and direct way. There is no need to construct elaborate narratives about everyday events because the truth flows effortlessly. But there is an interesting psychological phenomenon that happens when someone needs to cover something up. The mind begins to produce too many details to give credibility to the invented story. This excess arises from the unconscious fear of not being believed. The person feels that he needs to convince the other that that version of the facts is true, so he adds information about the traffic, about what he ate, about who was wearing what, creating a wealth of details that no one asked for, and that sounds artificial when compared to the way he normally communicates. The human brain has difficulty inventing and memorizing complex lies. Therefore, those who are lying often repeat the same story with the same words, almost as if they were reciting a memorized text. It lacks the natural spontaneity of those who simply remember something that happened, with small variations and different emphases each time they tell. Another telltale sign is the change in the pattern of communication. A person who has always been objective and direct suddenly starts giving long and far-fetched explanations about simple things. Or the opposite, someone who is communicative becomes monosyllabic precisely on specific subjects, creating a clear disparity between how they talk about some topics and how they avoid others. Contradictions appear when memory cannot sustain the fabricated version. Small details that change between one conversation and another, times that don't match when the timeline is reconstructed, places that were supposedly visited but that present inconsistencies when confronted with verifiable facts. The truth does not need to be remembered because it simply happened, but lying requires constant effort to maintain. And there is also defensive anticipation, when the person already arrives offering explanations before any question is asked. This rush to justify oneself shows that there is guilt operating in the unconscious, a need to control the narrative before the other has a chance to question or investigate on their own. 4. The inverted projection. The human mind has sophisticated defense mechanisms that operate without the person consciously realizing it. One of the most revealing is projection, where characteristics or behaviors that we do not accept in ourselves are attributed to others. When someone is doing exactly what they fear being discovered, they often begin to accuse others of that same conduct. Unfounded suspicions that come out of nowhere deserve special attention. A person who has never shown jealousy or distrust suddenly begins to question where the other was, who they talked to, why it took them so long to respond to a message. This radical change in behavior usually reflects the accuser's own inner state, not the conduct of the accused. Unconscious guilt needs to find a way to express itself. As it is unbearable to recognize one's own mistakes, the mind seeks relief by projecting these failures onto the other. If he is being unfaithful, he starts to see infidelity in completely innocent behaviors of his partner. It is as if the betrayal itself creates a filter through which all reality is interpreted. Two specific accusations also tell a story. When someone mentions very detailed scenarios of possible betrayal, describing specific situations and methods that the other person could be using, they are usually revealing their own operating manual. The imagination is rarely that creative. It tends to work with material that it knows from experience. The controlling behavior that accompanies these accusations serves a dual purpose. On the one hand, he keeps the other on the defensive, always explaining and justifying his movements, which diverts attention from who should really be questioned. On the other hand, it creates a smokescreen, where the questionable actions themselves are hidden behind the drama created by the unfounded accusations, and there is also disproportionate anger when the other demonstrates any independence or autonomy. Going out with friends, having hobbies of their own, maintaining a separate social life is seen as a threat or an indication of something suspicious. This need to control their partner's every move often reflects a fear that the other will find out what's being hidden, not a genuine concern for the relationship. 5. The sudden disinterest in routine. Established relationships create patterns of coexistence that become part of the structure of shared life. Small rituals, conversations about the day, genuine interest in what the other is experiencing form the fabric that keeps two people connected. When that interest fades for no apparent reason, something has profoundly changed in the internal dynamics of those who have moved away. Emotional energy is a limited resource. When it is being directed elsewhere, there is simply not the same investment left for the established relationship. Questions about how the day went are no longer asked. Subjects that used to generate long conversations are now received with visible disinterest. Presence is physical, but attention is completely absent. This distancing does not happen because the person has become busier or more stressed with work. It happens because there is a division of worlds happening internally. The secret world is getting all the emotional charge, all the excitement, all the energy that was once invested in shared life. What is left is just a shell, an empty presence that fulfills basic obligations without real involvement. Activities that were once pleasurable and awaited now become a burden. Family dinners, weekend outings, moments of intimacy are postponed, cancelled or held with an evident lack of will. The person is there in body present, but emotionally has already left that relationship a long time ago, keeping only the external structure functioning. The look also changes drastically. That twinkle in the eye that exists when there is genuine connection simply disappears. Eye contact decreases. Conversations take place with the person looking at the cell phone or anywhere else, as if holding the direct gaze was too uncomfortable because it would reveal the real distance that has settled. And there is also impatience with things that were once normal in coexistence. Small habits of the other that never bothered you now cause disproportionate irritation. Any attempt to approach is met with resistance or coldness. This intolerance reveals that the person is psychologically already out of that relationship, and every moment inside has become a weight that they need to carry until they can find a definitive way out. 6. The body language that bets. The body never completely lies. While the mouth can pronounce carefully chosen words, while the conscious mind can construct compelling narratives, the body responds to unconscious truths that cannot be fully controlled. That is why looking beyond words reveals much more than any direct conversation could show. The physical posture towards the other changes in subtle but significant ways. That almost imperceptible distance when they sit together, the way the body closes instead of opening during conversations, the crossed arms that create a physical barrier between two people who should be connected. These are small adjustments that the unconscious makes to protect the territory of secrecy. The touch also tells a complete story. It is not only the frequency that decreases, but the quality of physical contact that changes. Hugs become mechanical, kisses are quick and without real involvement. Any display of affection seems rehearsed rather than spontaneous. The body simply cannot feign intimacy when emotional energy is being directed elsewhere. Physical nervousness increases during conversations about certain subjects. Moving objects unnecessarily, scratching your face, constantly changing position, avoiding standing still are signs of internal discomfort. The anxiety that arises when the subject approaches sensitive areas manifests itself through these involuntary movements that the person does not even realize they are making. The fake smile is also easily identifiable when we know what to look for. A genuine smile envelops the eyes, creates specific wrinkles around them, and transforms the entire facial expression. The forced smile, on the other hand, is restricted to the mouth, seems glued to the face instead of radiating naturally, and disappears too quickly as soon as the situation that required it passes. And there is also the way the person behaves on the phone in your presence. If he used to answer calls normally, now there is a visible body change when the device rings. The body stiffens, the face changes expression. There is a hesitation before answering or a rush to leave the environment. Even without listening to the conversation, the body has already told everything that needed to be said about what that call represents. 7. The convenient memory lapses. Human memory works in complex and interesting ways. We clearly remember emotionally significant events, find it easy to recall established routines, and rarely forget important appointments for us. But when someone starts to have selective memory failures precisely about specific subjects, it reveals more about intention than about cognitive capacity. Strategic forgetfulness happens with suspicious frequency around important conversations. Discussions about future plans, agreements made, promises made simply disappear from the person's memory when the time comes to fulfill them. And the most interesting thing is that the same person can perfectly remember insignificant details from other areas of life. There is also convenient confusion about dates and events. The person is not sure if something happened on Tuesday or Thursday, if it was in that month or the previous month, if they were alone or accompanied. This purposeful vagueness creates a fog over the timeline that makes any attempt to reconstruct the facts accurately difficult. It is a form of unconscious protection against being caught up in contradictions. When confronted with concrete evidence of something they said or did, the person claims not to remember, or claims that the other misunderstood, that it was not quite like that. This denial of one's own history creates an alternate reality where there is never accountability because there is always an excuse based on memory failure or misunderstanding. The most revealing thing is to observe what memory works on perfectly. Work details, professional commitments, information that interests the person are remembered without any difficulty. But when it comes to the relationship, shared plans, or anything that requires real presence and commitment, suddenly memory fails conveniently and repeatedly. And there is also the rewriting of the past, where the person begins to alter narratives of events that happened not long ago. What was said in a conversation 3 days ago now appears with a completely different version, as if memory is being actively manipulated to serve present interests. This deliberate distortion of shared reality creates a sense of confusion in the other person, who begins to question their own perception of the facts. 8. The urgent need for external validation. Every human being likes to be recognized and valued. This is part of the social nature of our species. But there's a huge difference between appreciating a compliment and desperately relying on constant validation from people outside of the relationship. This exaggerated need reveals an inner void that is being filled by outside attention rather than genuine intimacy building. The excessive preoccupation with physical appearance that suddenly arises deserves attention. It's not taking care of your health or wanting to feel good about yourself, but a radical change in investing in the gym, new clothes, aesthetic care that didn't exist before. This transformation is often connected to the desire to impress someone specific, not just generic self-care. Social networks become the stage for a constant performance. The person who once had a discreet presence online now posts frequently, always at favorable angles, always showing a lifestyle that seems disconnected from the everyday reality he lives at home. It is as if there were a public version being carefully cultivated for consumption by a specific audience. The need to always be available for conversations and interactions outside the relationship also draws attention. Messages are answered immediately when they come from certain people. There is a visible enthusiasm for holding dialogues that extend for hours, while conversations inside the home are increasingly short and superficial. Social energy is being poured out, not into the established relationship. Frequent comments about third parties and comparisons that did not exist before begin to appear in conversations. Casual mentions about how good certain people dress, how interesting a certain friend or colleague is, how nice it would be to have certain qualities that others demonstrate. These comparisons reveal that there is an external frame of reference occupying significant mental space. And there is also the search for reasons to be away from home or in specific social environments. Events that previously did not arouse any interest now become unmissable. There is always a justification for being present in places where certain people will be. This change in social pattern is not random. It follows an internal logic that has everything to do with who the person wants to meet, not with the event itself. The validation you seek is no longer coming from within the relationship, but from the looks and attention you find when you are away from it.